Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on the Sunrise, and it is the 2nd of July, a beautiful Friday, if I put it that way, and also something we're all looking forward to because Fridays are actually the best day of the entire week. And I know I'm not the only one that thinks that way. I know you think like that too because Fridays are all about relaxation. Fridays are all about, you know, finally looking forward to the weekend, and especially because of how tiring and stressful our weeks have been, especially in the middle of a pandemic. It's very, very important that we sort of it's very important that we focus on the fact that it is a weekend, that we can have a lot of fun and we can focus on ourselves during this weekend. Okay, so that is what I'm very excited about today, and I know you're excited about it too. So make sure you text me on 07852473473, so that way you can tell me how excited you are as well, and that is something I would absolutely love to hear from you. Now, you're hanging with me, Sarah, and this is in fact the final of my show. But don't worry, because I'll actually be here back again on Monday to keep you company. But until then, I want to actually get into this discussion about this new drama series, or actually a docu series that Tracee Ellis Ross and Oprah Winfrey actually announced about black hair. Now, this is something that we're going to be talking about right now, and I think it's something that's very important because there are so many things we'll be talking about as well. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned. But before I get into that conversation, want to quickly tell you to follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And also make sure you download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. And that way you can actually make sure that you can be a part of this conversation any time of the day, anywhere in the world. And that is definitely going to help you with coping during lockdown. So make sure you do that. But let's actually get into this conversation right now. Tracee Ellis Ross and Oprah Winfrey are in fact announcing a TV show about black hair. So the docu-series, it will be called The Hair Tales, will feature intimate and authentic personal stories about black hair. Okay, now I will be talking about black hair, why it's so important that they have this kind of series, and also the stigma that surrounds black hair. And when I mean black hair, I don't mean like black hair, but hair of black people, afro hair. That's basically what I'm talking about. Now, the blackish actor Tracee Ellis Ross has actually announced a new TV show about black hair, and the team behind it will all be women of color. So I think in terms of diversity, in terms of making sure in terms of diversity, and even in terms of representation, this is something to look forward to. I mean, it is definitely a development, right? Because the entire team behind it will be women of color. Now, Ross will actually Ross rather will be the executive producer of the Hair Tales, alongside Oprah Winfrey and Michaela Angela Davis, who's the co-author of The Meaning Behind Mariah Carey. Now, the docuseries will in fact connect intimate and authentic personal tales of Black women's experiences and how they connect to much bigger societal and historical themes. So, obviously, when it comes to Black hair, there has been a lot of stigma about it. There has been a lot of negativity regarding black hair as well, and we've heard of so many different instances, especially, or even incidents, especially in the United States of America, rather, of how people with black hair, got harassed and abused and bullied and sometimes even killed simply because of their hair, simply because of the structure of their hair and what it sort of represents. Because we know and we understand, and I'll be talking about it as well, we know that when it comes to black hair, there have been certain stereotypes about black hair, right? Especially if you're someone with dreadlocks, then chances are people are going to look at you in a way and think you're a criminal or a thief, because that has been the stereotype. And these stereotypes have in fact been very, very detrimental. They have been very negative, and they have caused a lot of problems for black people all over the world, right? And it's important that we talk about this. It's important we deal with it, because we need to make sure that the future generations are much more aware and they understand the suffering and the oppression of black people, right? Especially in instances where they have been, traumatized, tortured, beaten, bullied, assaulted simply for being themselves. Now, something else we also need to talk about is cultural appropriation. Now, if you don't know what cultural appropriation is, it's basically when, to put it simply, for example, if you take cornrows, if you take dreadlocks, those things, when it comes to black people, those were the things, if if they had cornrows or they had deadlocks, they were in fact, tortured for it, they were looked down for it, they were stigmatized for it, and they were, they were told, it's ugly, fix your hair, it's unprofessional. You basically degraded those people because of their hair, right? But how cultural appropriation works is, if you're a person, if you're a person who has more privilege, right? For example, if you're a white person and you have, and you put, dreadlocks, or you have cornrows, then you're not going to get called out for it because you're white, right? So that is what cultural appropriation is. It's essentially when a person who has a higher privilege than you, or a person who has higher privilege uses, or for example, if it's like if it's a dressing, if it's something you wear, or if it's a hairstyle, a person of privilege actually does it, but doesn't actually get called out for it the same way a person with less privilege does it, right? Which is something we have seen happening around the world. Now, obviously you've seen how many times Justin Bieber got called out for cultural appropriation because of his dreadlocks, right? And that is what it is basically. When you're a person with privilege, you can get away with things that people who are, whose culture is that, wouldn't be able to get away. you know like I said, so many instances in the United States, so many situations around the world where black people have actually been bullied, beaten, and assaulted simply because of their hair, or because of the way they look, or because of the clothes they wear. But especially if you are a person with privilege, in this instance, we'll take, if you're a white person, then chances are, if you do it, you're not going to get called out for it. And honestly, that is something that's very, very unfair. That is something that is, not cool at all. And I think not cool is the nicest way to say it, because it's in fact very, very traumatizing. It's in fact very disrespectful as well, when you take these cultures that have been degraded, when you take these cultures that have been put down, and you try to make it this fashion aesthetic for yourself, which is probably the worst way in which you can disrespect someone. Now, since we're talking about black people, let's actually let's historically look into some of the oppression, that they face. So obviously, it started out with slavery. You know how there were slaves, and these slaves literally had no rights. And like, that's what the word slave means, right? You have no rights, you have no freedom, you have a master, you don't have any free will. That's what the life of a slave was. And if especially if you were a female slave, then you would get raped, you would get assaulted, especially by your master, and if you were married and you had a child, if you had children, then your children would only be allowed to be in that household for a certain time, and then you would sell those children as other slaves. So actually, when you take a look into black history, it has been very, very, it's very sad, it's heartbreaking, because they're also human beings. Why are you treating a human being differently just because of their skin color, just because of their differences? If anything, we should just accept, and we should be proud of the fact that there are so many different people out there who can exist. But obviously that's not how we are. It's all about asserting dominance. It's all about trying to show which race is more powerful and whatnot. And that's basically what it is. Even World War II was like that. That's what happened, with the Holocaust and everything. It was about trying to prove how great the Aryan race was. So obviously, when it comes to Black history, that is in fact very scary as well, because these people were treated less like people because of their differences. And the thing is, even though we're in 2021, and even though slavery was abolished a really long time back, black people are still treated that way. There is a lot of discrimination. There is a lot of institutionalized discrimination within the system, especially when it comes to black people. And we saw this a lot when George Floyd was murdered, right? We saw how the whole Black Lives Matter movement, how it came up, and it rose all over again, and there was this new found sense of activism, new found sense of justice, wanting fairness, especially when it came to Black people and the lives of Black people. And that's honestly that's obviously because of all the racism they face and all the discrimination they face as well. And given the fact that when it comes to proportionality of punishment, when it comes to how people are treated and the way you look at Black people, there was a lot of issues that they had to go through. So that's why I said it's very important to historically look at the struggle of Black people, and then sort of begin to understand why there is a lot of stigma about them and their hair, right? Now, for example, the best example I can think of right now is sometime back in the United States, they actually passed this law where certain hair types were considered unprofessional, and most of these hair types rather happen to be hair types that were there for black people, right? And that in itself is what I mean when I say institutionalized racism. Because if a white person probably had did an afro with their hair, you would consider it the biggest fashion statement. It would be, oh my gosh, it's the most trending thing, we all need to try it, because that is what it has been, even like historically. You would take something from a very you would take something from a culture that has been degraded, that has been put down and humiliated, and then use it as your fashion aesthetic. And that was probably the worst way to disrespect a culture, to disrespect a certain group of people that had gone through so much of struggle, that was oppressed like crazy. And you would just make a fashion statement out of it, like, oh, this is the new cool thing. I'm just going to completely ignore the fact that you have been penalized, assaulted, and tortured for it. I'm just going to make it my fashion statement, which is basically what it has been, right? So make sure you stay tuned, because we will come back to this conversation. We will get back to this conversation, because it is in fact a very, very important conversation that needs to be had, right? But until then, we're going to head into a small break, but make sure you stay tuned, because after this break, we'll be back to talk about it.
There's a lot of conversation around who pays more taxes, if it is the rich or if it is the poor, right? But when you are basically going out and during a day, you go to a restaurant, you have to pay taxes there. If you buy a car, you have to pay taxes there. So why is it even a conversation that the rich pay less taxes or the poor pay more taxes? Why is it a conversation like that?
Because it's true, the rich generally pay less tax. A rich person walks into a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's, they're not going to get a different bill than another person, right? They're still going to pay the same VAT on those goods, they're still going to pay the same thing. So that's all the same. However, the differences come in if you can pay yourself from your own company, you can structure it in a way that you pay less income tax through paying a bit of salary, paying dividends and so forth, and then also deferring income. Also, your pension payments or contributions can be different. So that increases your tax sort of gap, if you want to use it that way. Where a PAYE person just gets paid salary and bonus. And now those are the most highly taxed sources of income in the UK, definitely, in the UK. We've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? Because in a public company where the stock is traded openly on the stock exchange, the value of that stock is driven by supply and demand, it's driven by emotion, it's driven by news, it's driven by quite a lot of variables over and above the actual accounting or total net worth of that company. I mean, we've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? And the company may still have value, it may still be doing quite a good thing.
Again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, has how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
Not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays, the younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no. If that makes sense. They can't
accept rejection, essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if you, how did I do? Well, you didn't do very well. And they get upset, and when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young, well, I still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, he'd say to me, "You had one to forget." That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter, yeah.
He'd say to me, "You had one to forget. Get over it." And that was it. So I'd dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up.
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of lose. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much a lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Welcome back to The Sunrise. It is your girl Sarah, and we're talking about we're having a very, very important conversation, because we're in fact talking about black hair, and we're talking about how Tracee, Ellis, and Oprah Winfrey have actually announced this new TV show about black hair, which is basically a docuseries, and we're talking about it. But also, while we're in that conversation, we're also talking about why it's important for us to have this conversation, why it's important for us to make people aware of all the stigma of everything that a lot of black people had to go through, and what this series actually hopes to achieve. So that's what we're talking about now. Like I said, I'm very, very excited to be here, and it is the final lap of my show, but don't worry, because I'll be back again on Monday. But before we head into this conversation, I want to quickly remind you that you can follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and that way you can stay updated about everything we talk about, right? Whether it's sports, entertainment, entertainment, technology, health, whatever it is, you can always be a part of this conversation, and you can always be informed and updated, which is something very, very important in this day and age. So make sure you do that. But also, I want to quickly remind you that you can download our app both on the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. It's available for both iOS devices and Android devices. And that way you can be a part of this conversation any time of the day, anywhere in the world. Okay. So make sure you get the app. Make sure you follow us, because we have some amazing content for you. So make sure you do that. But let's get back into this conversation, right? Now the show, which is called the Hair Tales, like I said, it will connect intimate and authentic personal tales of Black women's experiences and how they're connected to bigger societal and historical themes. So now Tracee Ellis Ross said that, like many women, she can trace her own journey to self acceptance through her hair. The actor said in a statement, because the series is personal and universal, American and global. It is a love letter to Black women. And I think that's my favorite part because, you know, we're finally trying to get rid of all these ridiculous norms and narratives about black hair. It's so beautiful. If anything, it's just a different type of hair altogether, and it's so beautiful. I absolutely love black hair. So it's very important that they're finally trying to break away from all these negative narratives, these negative stereotypes that exist about black hair, and especially discrimination and the way people are treated because of the type of hair they have. Basically how they're bullied, they're abused, they're tortured and whatnot. And that's why it's very, very important to actually finally have this conversation and pay attention to that. So Davis actually added that there is a story in every curl, coil, and kink of their hair, and that this show will actually be a dynamic adventure through these stories of ancestry and innovation, politics and pop culture, ritual, resilience, and revolution, but will mostly reveal humanity. And what's important is, I think the show will actually affirm Black women, it will inform others, and it will, in fact, inspire everyone, right? Because that is what they're trying to achieve through this show. The show is about breaking down those narratives. It's about, making sure you tell everyone, you tell the whole world about these stories of community, your ancestry, where you're from, and why this kind of hair is so very important. And I know it sounds like a very it sounds like something that's not big because it's hair, right? Like, why would you want to talk about hair? But what's important is, like I was telling you earlier, because there is so much of stigma surrounding Black people's hair, because there's so much of stigma about the way they wear their hair, it's very important that this docu-series finally discusses all of it, right? Like I said, even when it comes to things like cultural appropriation, when it comes to, privileged celebrities wearing hairstyles of, certain cultures, that these cultures were degraded and stigmatized for, it's important that we discuss this. It's important we have this discussion so we can break those narratives, and also because we can make sure people are informed, they're educated, and they are aware of all these issues. Now, Ross actually said that the series would be about how the story of black hair also illuminates a broader narrative about around black identity and culture, because she said that hair is a portal into the souls of black women, which I think is very true, because it drives straight to the center of who they are. And their goal is to share this vibrant community where they hold a sacred space for each other with everyone who's listening, or everyone who's watching as well. Because like she said, it is in fact something that is personal, global. It's personal and universal, it's American and global, and it's a way of appreciating all that struggle, that sense of community, and your ancestry, for all those amazing, for the amazing hair that you have, right? And if you read poems from Maya Angelou, especially, Phenomenal Woman, you'd understand the sort of stigma there was for black women, because it's about finding her identity, it's about finding that self-confidence, it's about finding that sense of self that was lost, that sense of self that was, destroyed and taken away when there were slaves, and when slavery happened, they sort of destroyed this whole identity of black people, because you wouldn't wave them as anything other than slaves. They weren't even human, they were just slaves. Like, they had no rights. It didn't matter, what they did, it didn't matter what they did. And that's why it's very important that um that uh that it's very, very important that we finally have this discussion and make sure that we are aware of all these negative stereotypes that exist when it comes to black hair. Now, Timothy Ellis has just texted and he said, "This is super. Didn't know that there was a story about story to hairstyles." Well, I'm glad you're learning something, and I'm glad you're enjoying it as well. Because, like I said, it's important that we have this conversation. It's important that we educate people about that we educate people about things that they don't know about, things that they aren't aware of. Relax radio is all about education. It's all about making people informed about everything that's happening in the world as well. So very excited to actually talk about it, because this is something that I've noticed a lot, and I've seen a lot of my friends also be degraded, be stigmatized for the kind of hair that they have. And honestly, watching someone else suffer that way is in fact it's very disappointing. It's very heartbreaking, because you're just basing someone else's their worth based on things like their hair. But the thing is, this story is all about making or bringing that importance about, or bringing forward that importance about black hair. Now, something else I need to say as well is that even when it comes to hair products, right now, obviously, especially when you're a woman, there are so many different hair products that you use, because hair is very, very hard to maintain. I can relate. I've been there, but my hair is much, much easier to maintain. But when it comes to black hair care products and whatnot, um, there is a specific set of hair care products for black women, because their hair textures are so different. It's beautiful, it's different, it's thicker, and because of that, they have they have a separate set of hair care products as well. And they actually contribute, all black women actually contribute to $1 in $5 that are spent for hair care products. So obviously, that means that they do play a substantial role when it comes to hair care, to hair care in the cosmetic market and self-care market, right? So obviously it's important that we discuss things like social narratives, cultural narratives surrounding black hair as well. So getting back into what Ross was saying about black hair, and how she said that the goal of this docu-series is actually to share this vibrant community where they hold a sacred space for each other, and where they appreciate the beauty, where they appreciate that hair. Now, this series has been announced as the Crown Act. Okay, if you don't know what the Crown Act is, it's basically creating a respectful and open workplace for natural hair. And what this does is it basically prohibits discrimination based on hairstyles, and it has in fact become a law in 12 US states. Now, that is what I told you some time back as well, that when it comes to certain hairstyles that you can wear to work, certain hairstyles are in fact considered unprofessional. And like I said, a lot of those hairstyles belong to the black community. It is, like I said, very quite more often than not, it is black hair that is stigmatized and looked down upon. And because there are these laws that actually that there are these laws that um prohibit you from wearing your hair the natural way. They ask you to change your hair texture and whatnot. It's in fact very disheartening and disappointing as well, because for a country, it's quite ironic though, for a country that talks a lot about democracy, for a country that talks a lot about freedom of rights and people having rights to do whatever they want to do, and for a country that is considered the pinnacle of democracy, a lot of people in the United States actually have no freedom to do what they want. And like I said, especially people in the black community, they can't wear their hair the way they want to. They can't even wear their hair in its normal texture. So it just goes to show how ridiculous some countries are, because you'd call yourself democratic, you call yourself the free land, but people are really not free to do what they want. But that is that story, but that's a whole other story which we can have some other day. But getting back into this story about hair, right? The hair tales will actually continue Ross's agenda to celebrate natural hair. And in September 29, actually, she launched a black hair care line called Pattern Beauty, where the natural hair movement might be. So basically, for the natural hair movement rather, might be new for a lot of people, in that it is infiltrating and penetrating all aspects of the beauty industry and the beauty culture, right? It's also changing people's narratives and understanding of black beauty and black glory, because the thing is, they actually have been beautiful and glorious forever. And that's what she's told into Entertainment Weekly all the way back in 2019 as well. It's just, these women have always been beautiful, they've always been glorious, and they've always been so confident. Like, they're so beautiful, so it's quite sad that you're putting down a certain community, you're putting them down, and you're sort of portraying them as a community that's not that great. You're putting down the fact or you're just completely ignoring the cultural significance as well. So it's very very important that that this docu series actually discusses all of it, because I personally think in a way it's a way of opening it, opening up and breaking all these negative narratives, this stigma that exists about being black. And sometime back we actually sometime back we actually spoke about Beyonce and how there's this whole conversation about how they're using the baby bump to market themselves or to sell their songs and whatnot, right? Now what's important is even Beyonce, what she did was actually try to break that stigma about black bodies, right? Now, make sure you stay tuned because I'll be back after a small break to actually keep talking to you about, black bodies, black hair, and why this docu-series is going to be so important in breaking specific narratives and specific, stereotypes that exist within the black community.
One of the easiest ways to increase your net worth is to ensure that you have higher cash flows. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to not buy things on hire purchase, not buy things over months and months because you can't afford them now, but you want it. It's kind of that delayed gratification. Rather than buy that couch, that car, that stereo, that computer, whatever item, and pay it off over 12, 24, 36 months at an interest rate, rather invest that money, make do with what you've got, and then after 12, 24, 36 months, take the money that you've now invested and buy that good. An asset could be anything that appreciates or reduces a tax bill. So it could still be a liability, but it reduces their tax bill. And I'm not going to go into the technicalities because that's out of our remit here. However, for our use or our purpose, what we are talking to the listeners here is I would put this definition of an asset forward. An asset is anything that increases your income. Anything.
Now, there's a lot of conversation around who pays more taxes, if it is the rich or if it is the poor, right? When you are basically going out and during a day, if you go to a restaurant, you have to pay taxes there. If you buy a car, you have to pay taxes there. So why is it even a conversation that, the rich pay less taxes or the poor pay more taxes? Why is it a conversation like that?
Because it's true, the rich generally pay less tax. A rich person walks into a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's, they're not going to get a different bill than another person, right? They're still going to pay the same VAT on those goods. They're still going to pay the same thing. So that's all the same. However, the differences come in if you can pay yourself from your own company, you can structure it in a way that you pay less income tax through paying a bit of salary, paying dividends and so forth, and then also deferring income. Also, your pension payments or contributions can be different. So that increases your tax sort of gap, if that, if you want to use it that way. Where a PAYE person just gets paid salary and bonus. And now those are the most highly taxed sources of income in the UK, definitely, in the UK.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah keeping you company on the final hour of the sunrise. I'll be here all the way until 9. But until then, to actually get back into what we were talking about this new docu-series rather that has been announced by Tracee, Ellis, Ross, and Oprah Winfrey in terms of appreciating black hair and destigmatizing all these narratives that exist regarding black hair, right? So this is what we were talking about. And if you're just tuning in earlier, we took a look into, the historical struggle and the oppression of black people and why black hair has been so stigmatized. We also spoke about cultural appropriation. We spoke about what this TV series means, especially in terms of the future of black women, and why it's so important that this TV series, or rather this docu series, is now being released, because it's breaking all of these negative narratives about black hair. So before I actually get back into that conversation, I want to quickly remind you that you can follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. You can always be informed. You can always be updated about, you can be the first person to actually be updated about everything that is happening all around the world as well, especially because it's important to be informed about everything that is happening in the middle of a pandemic. Okay, so that's good. And also make sure you download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and that way you can be a part of this conversation anytime you want. So make sure you do that, and make sure to text me on 078 as well if you have any thoughts and experiences that you would like to share with us. Okay, so make sure you do that. But getting back into this conversation now, we were just talking about the stigma that exists when it exists when it comes to the black community, right? Now we'll also talk about black bodies. We'll talk about how there is in fact a lot of stigma that surrounds it. And like I said, when Beyonce revealed her pregnancy, she actually made the black body a subject of admiration. And the thing is, she broke all those stigmas that existed about how bodies should look like, especially black bodies. And she also paved the way for a lot of black celebrities in the future to make sure that their bodies are admired, to make sure that people don't stigmatize their body. Now, so something else that Davis actually said, that is that we must still continue to speak up about the change, and the understanding that influences policies like the Crown Act. Okay, because culture influences policy, and it will take a further 38 states to actually make it a law before it becomes a national mandate. And that is why it's very important that we start having these conversations, we start understanding why things like hair is very important to certain communities, and what it kind of means for these communities when you sort of create these narratives that it's completely normal, that it's in fact very admirable, and that is in fact it is in fact very, very normal to have that kind of hair. So Hair Tales is actually expected to debut on the Oprah Winfrey network, and it will also simultaneously be there on Hulu's Onyx channel in 2022. So that's next year. But let's actually get into a little bit about the stigma that surrounds black hair, because black hair is in fact it's shamed a lot, and it's always seen as unprofessional, or even portrayed as untidy. Right now, despite the efforts that have been pushed by mainstream media and the increased exposure of black hair education, black people actually can't always wear their hair proudly because of social prejudice. And what they're doing is in these recent years they're actually trying to show they're more than their hair, right? And what's important is a lot of people nowadays, we tend to judge people based on like one simple thing. It can be something, something wrong with their hair, it can be something wrong with their body, and you know what, there's nothing wrong with it. I think that's the kind of mindset that we need to stop inculcating, that there's nothing wrong with people looking different. In fact, it's good that people look different, because you don't want to have people who look the same, right? I mean, that would be so boring. Imagine seeing the same face like 1,000 times, like everywhere, on the streets, where you work, wherever it is, even the supermarket. It would be so boring if you kept seeing people who looked so alike, right? And that's what's important, because when we create this community where there's a lot of diversity, where we are accepting, and we are we're accepting, and we include all these different types of people, it just goes to show that these communities in themselves are in fact accepted, that these communities themselves do have a place in our lives. And especially given the fact, we spoke about the struggle of black people, given the fact that black people had to struggle so much, in terms of in terms of, the historical oppression they've had, in terms of institutional racism, and so many different things. It's important that we're finally taking these steps. It's important that this docu-series is finally creating that narrative that black people are so much more than just their hair, or their bodies, or whatever it is. You're just creating this whole narrative that they're human beings. You should appreciate them, you should respect them, and they're beautiful and glorious, and that's all the more reason why you should respect them, right? Now, in recent years, especially in the United States, there have been several incidents concerning violence and the targeting of black individuals for wearing their hair. Now, this has actually increased attention, and it has also made a lot of people aware, and it has also incited this call to action towards their mistreatment. Right now, what's important is black users on different platforms, be it YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, especially TikTok, Essence, Vogue, and Allure, are actually attempting to educate people. They're trying to educate other people about black hair. And even some time back, there was this whole issue on TikTok where black women weren't, black content creators weren't really given credit for all the dances they've created and whatnot. And instead, you had other people representing those dances, and that was in fact, quite outrageous. And that is just one example of how colored people are in fact discredited, how colored people are just pushed under the rug like they didn't do anything, and all the credit is just given to other people. And that's not the first example, and this is not the first time it's happening as well. That has been happening for a long time, and what's important is more people are in fact aware of it. More people are in fact, making a fuss when you try to discredit colored creators, and when you try to make sure that they don't get the recognition they deserve. Because it's important, because if society and all these laws and rules and regulations that we have is all about equality, it's about opportunity, it's about making sure that everyone has the same amount of opportunities, then why is it that we're not giving these opportunities to certain groups of people, to certain groups of in a community, right? So that is why it's very, very important that finally, they're breaking this narrative. They're trying to educate people, they're trying to normalize it and say, look, black hair is anything but ugly. It is beautiful, it's glorious, and you should appreciate it, because that is just how beauty is in diversity. So that's why it's important. Now, they have also invited the discussion of the mental and physical impacts of societal standards, which could include, extreme outcomes such as being murdered, imprisoned, fired from work, kicked out from school, even bullying, being abused, beaten, and profiled. Right. And like I said, for example, when it comes to dreadlocks, especially if it was dreadlocks on a black man, you would always look at that person in a way and assume that that person was either a criminal, a thief, or they were unclean. And these are just the sort of stereotypes that exist about other types of black hair as well. And you define dreadlocks as hair that hasn't been combed, brushed, or handled, or you just have a bunch of words that are probably like the worst way to explain a certain hair type, right? And something else you need to understand and keep in mind is that a lot of black men also have been profiled based on their appearances in the past, specifically because of dreadlocks, but also because they're black. So there is in fact a lot of controversy, there is in fact a lot of institutionalized racism, there is a lot of discrimination when it comes to black people. And hopefully this is what this docu-series will in fact address. They will address it all when it comes to hair. And I think hair is something important. Even though they're just talking about hair, eventually it will lead to a whole bunch of other conversations, because all of those things are going to trickle down to all the social injustices and social problems that exist for black people, right? So that is what this docuseries will do, and I have to say I'm very excited for it. I can't wait to watch it. And it's amazing that they're finally doing this, right? But it's time for me to actually head out of here and make way for Salah with the social roundup. So make sure you stay tuned, because she will be talking about so much more interesting stuff as well. So make sure you stay tuned. But until then, I hope you have a good day and a good weekend. But it's time for me to head out of here.